I'm going to give you two explanations of fictional things from two different mediums. One of them, a Studio Ghibli movie, Howl's Moving Castle. The other one, Dune, by Frank Herbert. This is Howl's Moving Castle. It is quite big, but certainly not big enough to hold much inside, other than steampunk parts. Here we have the house within the castle, in which a large part of the story takes place. There seems to be some kind of dial that rotates between colors next to a door. When the dial is turned to a color and you open the door, it opens to a large city. This city can't possibly be inside the castle. When the dial rotates to a different color, it opens to a different area. These areas are implied as different areas in the world, but how does this door lead to these areas? Well, magic, that's how. Now, I'll give an example of something from Dune. This is spice. It is found on the planet of Arrakis, and when consumed, it allows one to effectively expand their mind, and even allows some to see the future to some extent. The spice itself is incredibly valuable in the universe. Of course, it would be cool to expand your own consciousness and thinking abilities, but it is also needed for space travel, so spaceships don't crash into celestial bodies like planets or stars when traveling at fast speeds. We also know exactly how the spice is created. The large sandworms have a long lifespan. During an earlier life phase, they excrete fungosoid substance. Yes, that is what it's called. When this substance contacts water, it basically erupts, creating a spice below. The spice is riddled across the planet of Arrakis within its sands, and can be harvested manually or with a spice harvester. So, why did I give these two examples from completely different mediums, and how do they relate to each other, or differ? Well, let's compare. The spice in Dune is thoroughly explained, not only from how it's made, but to its impact and how much power it holds. As the readers, we know exactly what the spice is and how it's created. But with the castle and Howl's Moving Castle, we are only given brief explanations. You could say I simply explained more about Dune's spice than Howl's Moving Castle, but the way these strange ideas are displayed in each medium are complete opposite in my opinion. Dune goes out of its way to explain everything, explaining how everything works, in all of its intricacies. But any Ghibli movie, not just Howl's Moving Castle, actually does the opposite. Ghibli movies don't explain things fully, but that's kind of the point. Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another Peak Stasis video. This channel has existed for 10 months, and although there isn't an abundance of videos, expect that to soon change. I'm hoping to start making more videos about aspects of storytelling, the original purpose of this channel. If you're interested, consider checking out my other videos, and also consider subscribing for future uploads. Firstly, how does Dune deliver its information? Well, one can simply say the information is delivered in large chunks of information dumps, which is true for the book, although not so much for the movie considering its entirely different medium. But in both books and movies, you can see the information is explained thoroughly. But how exactly? Dune has a lot of complexity to it that can only be made sense of by doing a lot of comprehension and understanding of the story as the audience or the reader. For me, I didn't understand Dune much until I read about it online and then read the book after watching the movie. Dune can't really get away with showcasing something and not explaining it, even though in the movie it seems as if it does it all the time. The movie can't give narration about everything either. Let's see an example of something. The Fremen. There is no narration in Dune explaining everything about the Fremen, but we get context clues as to what they are. In one scene, we find out what still suits are. Suits made by the Fremen to recycle fluid that your body expends like urine and sweat. But in that scene, it isn't explained that the Fremen worship the sandworms, for example, or anything else about their culture or religion. We learn about all those things in different scenes. As we spend time with the Fremen, we also learn about their religion, its history, and the Messiah, or as they call it, Lisan al-Gaib. In the movie, the Lisan al-Gaib can't be explained fully, but it does a good job at explaining and giving information as to what exactly it is. We learn that the Lisan al-Gaib was basically a made-up concept by the Bene Gesserit. In the book, this is explained in detail, but in Dune Part 2, we see a character interaction with Stilgar. One of the Fremen says that the Lisan al-Gaib is made up, to which Stilgar denies. They also say that not all the Fremen believe in the Lisan al-Gaib, but we also learn about the Bene Gesserit and that they made the Lisan al-Gaib as a fake prophecy for them to exploit. Another thing is that while everything has an explanation, not everything necessarily needs to be explained. That doesn't sound like it makes sense, but allow me to explain. In the first Lord of the Rings, for example, going off topic to Dune, most of the history of Middle-earth exists, but isn't stated or told deliberately, as it is unimportant to the plot at hand for the most part. Only the history that is important to the plot is shown. Dune does the same thing, although most of the complex politics of Dune are actually explained in the book because most of them are relevant. But if something seems to be unexplained or vaguely explained, just know that Frank Herbert definitely did have it all figured out. He made sure that there were no contradictions in the story. What this basically means is that Middle-earth and the universe of Dune, although still different in storytelling and world-building from each other, basically created a world that functions and works, then wrote the story within their created world. Frank Herbert accounted for everything, even ecology, as seen in the life cycle of a sandworm on Arrakis, and how the strange and different food chain works on Arrakis, being comprised of the same species in different phases of its development for the most part, like an ecosystem of tadpoles and frogs, but more complex and in the sand, and worms. To put it simply, with each complicated concept and plot point, they are explained using character interactions, or simply by showing. The books expand upon this. The information is explained using character interactions in the book, but also inner monologue and brief paragraphs containing information. Now, let's take a second to look at Ghibli. Howl's Moving Castle is my favorite Ghibli movie, but since I already used an example from it, let's briefly look at Spirited Away, since I would imagine most people are more familiar with it. The spirit world in Spirited Away is a world that spirits inhabit, or kami, which is the name for a spirit deity in Shintoism. Ghibli movies take large inspiration from Shintoism, which has been confirmed, but it is also quite obvious if you're familiar with Shintoism. The spirit world's existence is not exactly explained. Chihiro, the main character, sees her parents turned into pigs. This doesn't happen randomly, it is because they were eating. The evil witch Yubaba turned them into pigs, but the process of turning them into pigs is not explained. It is not explained exactly how the pig conversion happens. It doesn't explain really anything outside of Yubaba being the responsible one. Any example from this movie would work with what I'm trying to convey, but I'll use my favorite element of ambiguity in the story. The idea of remembering one's own name. One of the main characters, Haku, says he cannot leave the spirit world and that he is bound there until he remembers his own name. I couldn't find anything online about the importance of names in Shintoism, although if I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments, but throughout history, the idea of names having power has been prominent in all cultures. But in Spirited Away, we don't know why exactly Haku needs to remember his own name to leave the spirit world, or what it means to remember one's own name. Another smaller example is one that actually appears in multiple Ghibli movies, that being the soot sprites. What are they? Well, simple, they're soot. Nothing particularly special, but in Spirited Away, they are working for Kamaji. Are they alive? Well, they must be, but no information is given on their existence otherwise. And even Kamaji himself, the one who works for the boiler, he has multiple limbs, but why? There really is no reason, although it sure does help with his job. I'll stop with the example for Ghibli, as I've already stated, any example from any Ghibli movie can be applied to some extent to what I'm saying. The main takeaway is that Ghibli movies can get away with not explaining everything in full detail. We don't need to know why Kamaji has more arms, because it doesn't matter, and honestly, I don't think the audience would care. But even for more important things, like how Howl's Moving Castle even works in the first place, don't need long explanations. But why is that? Why is it that the fact that Howl's Moving Castle, or why names are so important to Spirited Away, being largely unexplained, still works? Why isn't the unexplained stuff jarring at all? Well, when you think of something in a story, you can think of the thing itself, like for example the importance of names, as a house, and your understanding of it, or the explanation of it, as the material the house is made of. Before I continue with that analogy, let's bring Dune back into it, and compare the two. Using the analogy, Dune gives us a description of all the materials that we can use to build our metaphorical house, how they work, and why they work. A Ghibli movie will give us a description of most of the parts in the house, but the foundation as to why it works is left up for your interpretation or imagination. That is what sets these two apart so much, and I can't think of a better analogy to use, but let me know in the comments. Instead of relying on the writing to convey and describe every single detail, Ghibli movies rely on you, the watcher, to interpret whatever is happening, however you want. This could be the reason why many people say Ghibli movies are like dreams. But this doesn't mean Ghibli movies are lazy and don't want to give explanations. In fact, the opposite is true. You can't just add elements to a story and then call it a day without having reasoning as to why they were added, or not have it make sense. This is because it makes the story convoluted and can create contradiction if it isn't done well. At the end of the day, is one better than the other? Absolutely not. They are completely different means of telling stories. We've talked about fundamental differences, but for fun, I wanted to talk about a few differences in what you get out of each story. But for this section, I wanted to let someone else explain it.
Hello, Peak Stasis viewer. I am Jarlam. All of us can appreciate a good story, but we don't appreciate all stories for the same reasons. Peak Stasis outlined Dune and Ghibli movies as complete opposite, so it is an interesting example. Dune has a lot of complicated plot points and politics. While it is easy to get lost from time to time, the way the different factions clash together, the power that the spice holds, or the fact that the Lisan al-Gaib is a false prophet are all very interesting, and it is always nice seeing different plot points connect. It is also very rewarding when you figure things out in Dune. And then Ghibli movies. These movies feel very mystical. A character could float in one scene, and in the next, they are talking to a fire. It sounds like these elements are all over the place, but it is kind of organized chaos. While Dune explains everything, you can appreciate Ghibli movies for letting you as the viewer interpret it however you want and chooses not to overload your mind with information about the plot. The two examples also have different atmospheres, with Dune being more dark and realistic, and Ghibli being more mystical, mysterious, and wholesome.